So after the announcement of Sora earlier this week, I decided to explore current text-to-video tools primarily in the area of motion and not video generation. The reason why Sora is so good is because OpenAI has kind of worked really hard to get the physics and the motions correct. And there was one very interesting tool I found. It's doing a great job in this space. And the name of the tool is Boximeter, and the paper here is released by ByteDance, which is the parent company of TikTok. And how it works is very simple. So the entire model works on the concept of what you call boxes, where you draw boxes like these on different objects. So you can see this is the first box, this is the second box, and this is the third box. And then the image is animated. And then that is how the entire image is turned into a video, which is effectively, I think, what Sora is doing under the hood, but it's automatically kind of creating boxes and adding motion to the image. In my last video on Sora, I very clearly mentioned that the reason why their video generation tool is doing so well is because they've done motions really well, which is something that current tools like Gen 2 and Pika weren't able to do too well. And I also made like an entire comparison. You can go ahead and check out with the current prompts here. I compared it on Pika and Gen 2. Anyway, so what is Boximeter, right? Like I said, it's box plus animation, and it allows for fine-grained motion control, which means a deeper motion control. And here's how it works. I already told you. So you can select an object using these dotted lines, and then you define the motion for that object. So you draw a second box that says where that object will go. You can also define it using the motion power, or you can define it using both, which basically would say that this object would go left first and then would go to the box here. You can control as many objects. So you can see you can draw a second green box and you can do the exact same thing with the second object, which is in this case is a person. But in the sample that you see here is effectively a skull, and the same person basically first saying that take the skull, pass it on the face here, which is the second object, and then you select the second object and you draw a second bounding box, which means this object should be animated in this space. And then finally you select like the third box, which kind of gives the entire body an animation of sort. Now there are a couple of samples here. Let's take a look at some of these. So this is the motion video for a cat, where you see multiple objects are selected and then the cat goes inside the cup. Let's see another one here. This seems a relatively complex thing to animate. So you can see it's selecting multiple objects here, and then there is the entire animation that's added over the video itself. Now again, this is an image that gets turned into like an 8-second video. Let me show a few more samples here. You can see there's a hamster that looks like a pilot, and then there is a fighter jet in the background, and then the hamster is kind of scrambling towards the jet. Again, it's not as good as what you see, but I'm assuming what is happening here on Sora. But OpenAI is just too smart. They've kind of added their own models to also figure out what the motion of the image should be. Now, if you want to read the technical paper, they have the link to the paper here. They also have a demo video which is a little bit long. It's not like a demo video, but it kind of talks about everything that the model can do, its limitations and stuff like that. And then there is the paper here. One interesting thing that I want to point out in the paper, and obviously you can look at the training data here, how it works, so how they've trained the model, something that Gen 2 and Pika should be inspired to look at. And I'll also show you the comparison with respect to how Boximeter animates the images versus how Pika and Gen 2 currently does. Now note that Boximeter itself was announced before Sora, so I don't know, maybe this kind of pushed OpenAI to release their paper fast. I don't know. So you can see that this is the important bit. It kind of gives us understanding with respect to how they animate in the background. So you have a square that you draw on the image. What the model behind the scene does, it kind of draws like a soft box outside your box, and then when you animate the image, it will not only look at your box, but it will get context outside, a little bit more outside the box itself, to do a better animation. You can see there are the samples here. So when you animate something, it's not just that your box is looked at for animation, but rather a soft area that is, or a soft box that is also kind of looked at. Now you can kind of go through the study here. It's kind of talking about how they've trained the model, what kind of data set they've used, what were the numbers, results, inferences, and so on and so forth. You can see how the first frame was generated, how the last frame was generated, and between these two, the entire animation was generated. So very interesting, right? So they look at the first frame, they generate the last frame, and then kind of add animation to the. Now I tried to click on the demo option here, but right now they don't have demo, which says that they will have something into next 2 to 3 months, and they will attach the demo link here. here, and in the meantime we can also drop a note to these guys to get access to the demo. If you want them to generate a sample for you, you can share an image as the initial frame, the text prompt to describe the motion you need, and they will get back to you with the animation. Now let's compare how it fares against the current set of models, but before that let's just take a quick look at this. This is one of my favorite ones. You can see there is the AI generated image of Muhammad Ali, and I think this is Mike Tyson. We selected the first object and we say go to Mike Tyson and then come back, which is almost like shuffling. And then you draw a second box which says that Mike Tyson should dodge and then kind of come back. And you can see this is very cool because it does exact same thing that we told it to do motion wise. Now I know this is like a very nascent stage and definitely does not look like it's going to get to a point where this is. But if you look at some of the generations on here, this one, I think if enough computing power and processing is put into generating the image rather than an image like this, then you can make it look similar to how this looks, right? Because effectively what this is the game of motion. Now when I was reading the technical docs here at OpenAI or the technical report of the Sora model, if you scroll a bit down, you will realize that with the base compute, I'll just let it load for a few seconds. So you can see with the base compute, the generation looks like what you would see on Gen 2. But if you 4x the compute, quality and the generation relatively improves, which is something that you would see sometimes on the open source model, but motion wise this is better. But with x the compute, this is how it. So I'm wondering if you can just, multiply the compute that we are currently putting for these images and then make it look like this. As for the open source nature, while an open source model was used to train a Boximeter, there is no note currently on if this is going to be an open source model. So if it is an open source model, it's going to help a lot of us to kind of play around with the compute to see if we can get to a good point where we can generate something like this. Now, as for the comparisons here, so you can see the generation by Boximeter, which is clearly the box-based animation, and this was done by Pika and this was done by Jen. Now, this is another example here. You can clearly see this has more life than both of these. In this scenario, this one looks better. This one is also generating the comparisons again. I don't know from where this guy is getting the rows, but the generations cross look fine, right? This one looks interesting, the umbrella flying off of a girl's hand. This one looks very good as well. So overall, if you look at the comparisons here, definitely what you see here is way more promising than what you see currently on Gen 2 and Pika. Obviously, they are not all bad. These are just models that are constantly improving. And now that Sora is out, I'm sure they have pressure to get to a point where they become commercially viable as soon as possible. But would I call this an open source alternative to Sora? For motion animation, yes, if they turn out to be open source. By the looks of it, it does seem like this is going to be open source in the future, but I don't think they've mentioned anything at this point of time. Even their GitHub page says nothing about, this is I think the GitHub page, and it says nothing about open source. So I wouldn't bet that it's going to be open source, but there's definitely a chance that this could be open source. There are a couple of tips here for sharing the image, but yes, that's pretty much all I wanted to cover about the model itself. If you want to try out certain images, you can send them an email here and they will reply with a generated video to you as soon as possible. So let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next